The overhead press is one of the hardest lifts to progress on. Lifters usually find themselves stuck doing the exact same weights over and over again, and it usually comes down to one of 5 mistakes, which I'm going to cover in this video. By far, the biggest overhead press killer that I see is having the wrong bar path. Time and time again, I will see people and they'll be pressing the bar up and away from them. The bar will be going kind of out and in front rather than up and over. If the bar drifts too far away from the midline of the body, it becomes more of a front raise than it does an overhead press. And your capacity to lift overhead compared to your capacity to front raise, it's a night and day when it comes to the weights that you can lift. Instead, what you want to do is you want to bring the bar just underneath your chin. It should almost be that if you were to bring it straight up and down, it would actually clock you in the jaw. This is how you know that you're in the right position. From here, as you press, you're going to bob your head out the way and then drive through, locking out. If this is the fix that you need to do, as soon as you implement that change, you will find an immediate difference of how the press feels. One, you'll probably out of the gate be able to lift a little bit more, but it will also probably feel a bit more comfortable and a lot more natural. Mistake number 2 is almost just as common as the first mistake, but it's not talked about a lot, and it's letting the core, the glutes and the legs just kind of sit loose. This will give a tendency to kind of turn your overhead press into a little bit of a kind of backbender. It's something that will kill your power output. You got to think about it like this. Would you rather run your best 100-meter time on the track, or would you rather try and run it on a sandy beach? When you try and run it on a sandy beach, you've not got that stability, that hard hit off the tarmac. What you've got instead is sinking and loss of power. And that same thing can apply to your lifts. If you've not got a stable core, a stable lower body, if everything's not tight, flexed and braced down, you're not giving yourself the kind of best stability to be able to transmute force into that bar. That stability is a big reason why many guys can actually seated overhead press more than they can stand and strict press. Mistake number 3 is just trying to progress too quickly. You can't have the same expectations on your overhead press than what you can on your bench. You know, and again, it just kind of carries up the line. When it comes to your compound lifts, they definitely have a load capacity and a kind of rate of progression. You know, the biggest kind of front and foremost, you're going to have your deadlift. It's then going to scale back into the squat. It's then going to be the bench, and then it's going to come your overhead press. And because of that, it just moves a little bit slower, and you have to kind of anticipate that. And because of that, you've got to think about it more akin to your kind of other exercises, more akin to your accessories. You know, you're not going to like progress your barbell curl every single week in the same way that you could potentially when you first start out progress your bench every single week. Your overall strength potential on the overhead press is just generally lower. And because of this, you might have to then implement progression strategies that are more akin to an intermediate or advanced lifter earlier on. One of the big things you can do to help yourself is just invest in microplates. When it comes to your overhead press, you know, especially if you're following something like a kind of cookie cutter program, even, you know, the good ones, things like starting strength, for instance, you're going to be able to progress your squat and your deadlift with 2.5 to 5 kilo jumps pretty easy week after week. But when it comes to the overhead press, that's going to catch up to you very quickly. And because of that, you might need to, you know, you might do a weight and that weight is too easy. And then when you jump up 2.5 kilos, it is significantly too hard. So what do you do in that circumstance? For you, it might just be getting those fractional plates and just progressing up kind of a smaller jump week to week, so you can kind of stretch that time horizon on your progression rather than just kind of bang your head against the wall going between a weight that's too light, a weight that's too heavy, a weight that's too light, a weight that's too heavy. If you don't want to do this, then it's more kind of playing around with reps, you know, trying to kind of get more volume over time, adjust to that kind of higher volume threshold, and then, you know, go into kind of times of training slightly heavier and try and kind of push the boat out with those two approaches so that you can slowly but surely spike your overhead press over time. Mistake number 4 is neglecting your accessory exercises. There's a lot of people that think that they can, do all their accessories for bench, have a kind of complete program in that way. They're doing their bench, they're doing their lat pull downs, they're doing their rows, and they think that they've got kind of a pretty complete upper body program. They even throw in a strict press and they think that that's enough. The thing is, if you want to get good at something, you've got to kind of train everything around it. So getting better at strict press by just doing strict press can often not be enough. So that's when things like, your dumbbell shoulder press, your machine shoulder press, even kind of hitting things like your lateral raises, incline presses, pin presses, push presses, these are all going to contribute to getting a better strict press. If you can train a certain attribute of the lift by doing something else, you should. And again, it comes down to that kind of twice a week frequency. We find that with a lot of lifts. We definitely find that with bench. If you do a bench one day of the week, you maybe need to follow up with maybe a close grip bench still within the week on a separate day. And that same thing applies. It doesn't have to pure overhaul your program, but even just doing like a standing strict press one day, and then as an accessory after your bench, doing a seated dumbbell overhead press, that can be a major difference. You can't get better at strict pressing by just overhead pressing once every week, once in every 10 days. That's not going to be enough. We've got to be developing strength at every part of the movement, strength at lockout, strength for the start. Also just gaining size in the shoulders is going to help. Gaining size on the triceps is going to help. Getting all these things polished out, you should see a big difference in your overhead press. Number 5, putting it on the back burner. All too often we see people that will really kind of not care about their overhead press. They go, it's basically a front delt and tricep movement. I cover that with this exercise, this exercise, this exercise. And it's obviously that's just kind of not the case. There's still a lot of strength and size advantages that come from overhead pressing. But a lot of these issues will probably be covered in the previous points. If you're not doing your accessories, if you're not doing your frequency, that could kind of be putting it on the back burner. But let's say you're doing those things. Maybe you're training a press twice a week. Maybe your form is great. Maybe you're doing, accessory exercises and it's still stuck. What do you do? Well, this is where you take it off the back burner and you put it to the forefront. A lot of people will be trying to progress on their bench press and their overhead press at the same time. And for a long time, that's obviously very sustainable to do so. But if you're stuck and it doesn't go up for any reason, for love nor money, it might be worthwhile for you to bump up its priority and actually give overhead press a bit more of an advantage over your bench pressing. Maybe cut back your benching so that you can do more overhead press and more overhead press accessories. There definitely comes a point in time where you advance to a level and you have to start kind of picking and choosing what you want to be good at, and that's where kind of specialisation comes in. If you're kind of into the intermediate phase, kind of late intermediate, it might be worth your while to just run a phase of overhead press specialisation where you don't really care much about your bench and you just really kind of try and keep that on maintenance whilst pushing the boat out with your overhead press. So those were the 5 mistakes that are holding back your overhead press. Let me know down below, do you agree with these 5 mistakes? Are there any mistakes that I maybe missed? And are there any videos in the future that you would like to see? If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe so you can stay up to date on the latest ones.